So, welcome everybody. If this is your first time in a webinar, rest assured that no one else can see you or hear you. So if you're still trying to negotiate with children going to bed, if you're got other things happening in the background, please don't fret. We're not going to see you. You're not going to suddenly appear on a live stream screen. So rest assured, I know they were some of my concerns in the first webinar I attended. For those of you I haven't met before, welcome. My name is Dr. Christy Goodwin, and I'm thrilled that you're here. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we go this evening. What I really aim to do tonight is to allay some of your concerns and your fears around young children growing up in this digital world. I think for a lot of us, we used to stare at the sky and not at screens. We grew up in a world where we saved our work on one of these. Does anyone remember one of these? We had phones that had cords attached, and we grew up in a time where we had photographs on a Kodak roll that we took to a camera shop to have developed. And these days, life is just so different. And parents, I think, face the digital dilemma. I think on one hand, we marvel at what technology can do with young children, but on the flip side, there's this lingering fear. Is it harming? Is it derailing our child's development? And that's what I'm here to do tonight, to arm parents with some evidence-based information so that you can feel empowered to make choices, evidence-based choices about how you will negotiate this digital terrain with children. Now you should notice a little chat window in the right-hand column of your screen. Feel free to pop in any questions throughout there this evening. Now I'm a big advocate of monotasking, doing one thing at a time. I'm not going to try and multitask and deliver the presentation and watch the chat. So what I will do towards the end of the presentation is answer some of the questions. I'll do my absolute best to answer them in the time that we've got here together tonight. If I don't get through all of the questions, or there's something that I didn't address in the presentation, I'll certainly use the questions in future blog posts and some Facebook posts as well. So rest assured that I will do my very best to answer those as we go. So I'm going to officially switch my screen off and launch the presentation. Okay. Okay, hopefully we're cooking. So we are raising digital kids. Does anyone here remember? Oops. Anyone here remember this? Yes, this is not an artifact that many children would recognise these days. In fact, I went to a school recently and asked children what this particular object was, and they were absolutely bewildered. Perhaps you remember this sound. And we know that technology is changing absolutely everything that we do. And in fact, one of the reasons that we're so concerned and confused as parents and bewildered in this digital age is that technology is evolving just so quickly. We're scrambling to keep up as parents. We have something called the penetration rate in the technology world, and this is basically how long it takes the technology to penetrate to 50 million users worldwide. So the radio, which was the original wireless, took about 38 years to reach penetration rate. The telephone took 20 years, television took about 13 years, mobile phones took 12 years, remember the big brick we all used to carry around. The internet took 4 years, Facebook took 2 years, YouTube took 1 year. How long do you think it took Angry Birds? It took exactly 35 days. Absolutely amazing to think that in that short period of time that technology has changed so rapidly. We have this love-hate relationship with technology. I often liken it to my relationship with my husband. When it does what it's supposed to and operates in the right sort of functional way, it's brilliant. But when it doesn't do what it's meant to do, it's incredibly frustrating. It's that whole can't live with it and can't live without it. So how do we use technology in healthy and helpful ways with young children and minimise some of its inherent risks? Because there are risks associated with young children using technology if we don't use it in the right ways. So for those of you who I haven't met before, it's lovely to virtually meet you. I am a former teacher, school teacher, primary school teacher, turned academic, and I started researching how technology was impacting on very young children's learning and development. In particular, I looked at preschoolers and primary school students. I then became what I called the frustrated academic when I became a mum for the first time. I realised as a parent just how confusing and concerning it was to raise kids in the digital age. This all came to a head at my second son's health nurse check when she asked me, the healthcare nurse asked me what apps I was using with my 6-month-old. Now at the time I was chronically sleep deprived, as you are often with a 6-month-old, and I couldn't form a coherent response. The poor health nurse didn't know what I did for work, but I was absolutely alarmed that parents were given a lot of misinformation when it came to navigating the digital world. So I started my business, Every Chance to Learn, to help translate the research, because parents need access to evidence-based information. There are so many myths and misnomers and misinformation when it comes to raising kids. On one hand, we're told that we need to be introducing them, I call it dunking them in the digital stream, really early on in life. And then the next minute we read media headlines that tell us that technology is really harmful for our child's development. So parents are confused and concerned, and it's a really polarising topic. Parents are often quite firm in their belief about how children or whether young children should be using technology. I want parents to feel confident about raising kids in the digital age without having to ban the iPad or switch off the internet, because whether we love it or loathe it, our kids will inherit this digital world. And our job as parents is to arm them with the skills and strategies so that they form healthy media habits. And that's my goal tonight, just to arm you with some of the evidence-based information. I am going to help you find the healthy and helpful ways to use technology without compromising young children's health and development and their learning and well-being. I have to say at the outset, I'm not here to shoot on you. So this is not about telling you how you should be doing things. I live by Maya Angelou's saying that it's when you know better, you do better. And unfortunately, for many of us, we don't know what it's like to parent in the digital age. We've got no frame of reference. We grew up in a world that was completely different. We had analog childhoods, not digital childhoods. So we need access to evidence-based information so that we can make informed choices about parenting. So as I mentioned, I'm a mum. I'm also a children's technology and development researcher, and I translate the research from a range of disciplines. I look at the neuroscience, I look at developmental science, and I look at technology research, and I look at how it's intersecting with young children's health, well-being and development. Really what I want to help parents is to find ways for children to thrive in this digital age. And that doesn't mean that they have to ban or fear or ignore technology. It's about using it in these healthy and helpful ways. So that's what I want to share with you tonight. Some cute children pictures. I'm a very proud mama to two gorgeous little boys, Taj and Billy, who are 5 and 2. So I'm in the trenches with you. I understand what it's like to have a child that has the techno tantrum. I understand about worrying about how much screen time they're having and if they're doing the right sorts of things. And I'm going to confess, I don't always get it right. There are times when my 5-year-old perhaps watches more YouTube clips on the iPad than educational apps. I'm not saying that I have a down pat solution and a very clear-cut answer. But what I do know is that the research tells us that when we use technology in healthy and helpful ways with our young children, that we can actually support, not stifle, their learning and development. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. I'm just going to arm you with 5 simple ideas about how we can help our little ones form these healthy and helpful technology habits. Now, for those of you who are just jumping in, please feel free to pop any questions in the chat as we go tonight, and I will do my very best to answer them at the end. So parents often ask me, is technology really changing our children? And I usually ask this question. It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but anyone had that physiological feeling like your phone is ringing, but it's nowhere near your physical body?
Now, as parents, we all love a label, and phantom vibration syndrome actually describes that physiological sensation we get when we feel like our phone's ringing, but it's nowhere near our physical body. This is evidence that technology is changing our adult brain architecture, and we'd like to think that our brain is a lot more sophisticated than our children's developing brains. So I think there's very little doubt, whilst we may not have the long-term neuroscientific evidence yet, there's very little doubt that technology is changing us as adults, and it's therefore changing children. It's changing sleeping patterns, thinking styles, our attention spans, our focus, our capacity to multitask. It's also changing the way young kids learn and develop. It's also changing their sleeping patterns, their mental health, their physical development, including their eyesight, their musculoskeletal health, and we'll touch on that tonight, even things like electromagnetic radiation exposure and their hearing. So it is definitely changing us. Why do we need to be worried? I want you just to have a quick look if you can, and I really hope the screen sharing function is working. But in this image, what do you notice? And if you look quite closely, there's one anomaly in this particular picture, and you've probably seen the rounds of this on social media lately. Do you notice the old lady here? Now, a really interesting observation. Notice every other adult, this was at the recent Pope visit in the United States. And really interesting that we are so fixated. We have these really strong attachments to our devices, yet we're really alarmed and surprised that our children have these strong attachments to devices. There is a new phenomenon that we're calling, and it's called, Susan Pearce from Mind Gardener coined the term FOM, fear of making memories. And there's this concern that as adults we're doing something called cognitive offloading, that we're offloading some of our memory-making capacity to technology, to our gadgets, to our camera roll, instead of truly experiencing the moment. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't be snapping photos, but it's just evidence of just one of the little nuanced ways that technology is changing us as adults. And I think there's very little doubt that it's changing our children too. Sorry. So, what does modern parenting look like?
I'm doing it.
You got a problem, Max?
What?
I'm really proud of you, buddy. You did great. I missed it on here. I need to recreate the whole thing. If I can't share it, it's like it didn't happen. Do you understand?
Okay.
Are you missing out on real time?
So modern parenting is, as this video showed, really totally different to our childhood. Our parents weren't pulling out smartphones to record moments. And parenting at the best of times is hard, and I think parenting in the digital age is really, really hard. As I mentioned before, we've got no frame of reference. We had analog childhoods, and we didn't live in this digitally saturated world. We live in a tsunami of screens these days, and that's so foreign to us as adults. As I touched on before, the technology is changing so rapidly. So just when we understand what our children are interested in, they either find a new gadget, app, or game that interests them, and we have to start to learn that technology. But I think the one reason that modern parenting is so hard is that we're given conflicting advice. A lot of the research that a lot of the information that we're given as parents when it comes to raising kids is actually grounded in ideology and not actual science. There are just so many myths and misinformation about technology, and I'm going to hopefully debunk some of those. You know, our parents didn't have to make the same sort of parenting decisions. Usually, for most of us, the only decision our parents had to make about technology was about TV, and it was about switching it on and switching it off. It was fixed to the lounge room wall. It didn't travel in pockets and handbags and sneak into bedrooms in pajama pants. So we're really, really finding it hard to navigate this digital terrain as parents. If you've not yet experienced the techno tantrum, count yourself very lucky. And I see this with parents right from very young toddlers who don't want to give mum or dad's smartphone back, right up to adolescent children. I do a lot of work in classrooms and schools, and can I tell you, I've seen 12 and 13-year-old children having the techno tantrum. In fact, I was on an aeroplane flight recently and saw an adult having a techno tantrum when when the air steward asked her to turn her phone off, and this particular passenger didn't want to do that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit very quickly now about why. I think this is one of in the parent seminars I deliver. I travel throughout Australia talking to parents and to educators and to health professionals all about how technology is changing young children's learning and development. And overwhelmingly, most parents and educators are wanting to know why children are experiencing these intense tantrums when they're using technology. And unfortunately, I don't have a simple solution. If I did, and no, there's no app for it, I think we'd be a whole lot better off. But what I'm going to do is shed some light into what's happening neuroscientifically so that we start to understand what technology is doing to our children's brain architecture. And I think this is a great example of what a really powerful influence technology is on our children's brain architecture, on their well-being and their health. So why do children have a techno tantrum? When they're using technology, whether they're watching a television show, a DVD, or playing a tablet device with an app, their brain is actually giving them little squirts of dopamine. And dopamine is that feel-good neurotransmitter. So when they're playing an app and they're being rewarded and told, well done, good job, have another star, go to the next level, excellent work, their brain's giving them lots and lots of dopamine. And what do they want? More and more of it. And this is the exact same reason why we feel compelled to check Facebook first thing in the morning, or to do one last sweep of our email before we go to bed. It is literally craving that dopamine squirt. So at least you now know that it's normal, and rest assured, if your child is having a techno tantrum, you're not alone. It is a normal behaviour, but one that we do need to be mindful of. So do we really need to worry about young children's technology? As I mentioned before, when we use technology in healthy and helpful ways, it can support young children's learning and development. But there are some pitfalls and potential harmful effects if we don't use it in the right ways. What we know, and this is sort of neuroscience 101 in 1 minute, is that 90% of a child's brain architecture is established in the first 5 years of their life. So we're literally conducting a bit of a living experiment. We don't yet have a whole lot of long-term research. Remember, the iPad has only just turned 5 years of age. So when people say, what are the long-term impacts? What are the harmful effects? We really don't yet know. What we're doing, and what I do, is draw on these different areas of research, the neuroscience, the developmental science, and the technology. And there are some concerns. We need to be alert but not alarmed. We have to be really mindful that we do know a whole lot. Children have unchanging developmental needs, and there are some concerns that technology may be interfering with the natural developmental process if we're using it excessively or inappropriately. You see, children are coming online before their brains have come online, and this has obvious implications. With brain development, it gets started in the sensory and motor regions of the brain. This is the more primal part of the brain, and it's necessary for our survival. This is where our orienting response comes from. After this sensory and motor region is developed, then the next part of our brain development occurs in the prefrontal cortex, and this is where our executive function develops. This is where we develop our self-directed attention and our higher order thinking skills. But this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, isn't actually developed until early 20s for females and late 20s for males. So when our attention is constantly being captured by a screen, it's activating this primal sensory region of the brain, and it's strengthening the neural pathways in that part of the brain. However, when we freely and voluntarily direct our own attention, we strengthen a completely different set of pathways that come from this prefrontal cortex. Now, this development going from the primal part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex usually occurs between the ages of 3 to 4 years, and this is a really major shift. However, there are concerns that we are possibly overstimulating the sensory and the motor region of the brain by bombarding young children in particular with technology. So we have to be mindful. Remember, children don't yet have impulse control development in the young years, so we have to be mindful about how we're using technology. So what I've done in an upcoming book that I'm releasing next year, I've said there are 7 really basic principles that children need for optimal development in the digital age. And they're the sorts of things that your mother and your grandmother would have considered when they were raising children. Things like relationships, language, sleep, play, movement, executive function skills, that's all our impulse control, and also good nutrition. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of these as we go through tonight. But we just need to be mindful that technology can either shrink or expand each of these particular developmental needs that we have. I love this quote by Warren Buchleitner that says, technology is a little bit like fertilizer. If we use the right type and the right amount, our plant will blossom. However, if we use the wrong type or too much, you can burn the plant. And that's what it really comes down to. It's not about technology being good or bad or positive or negative. It's really about how we use it, when we use it, and with whom we use it for it to be optimal and healthy. So I'm going to dive into my 5 tips right now about how you can raise healthy and happy children. One of the most important things that we can do is to foster really healthy sleep habits. Sleep is absolutely vital for a child's development. Now, bear with me here. I'm going to try and do a poll. Let's see, stop screen sharing. Now I'm back, and I'm just, sorry, I'm just trying to see how I do. Nope, I might have to come back to this at the end. Control room. I will come back. I was going to do a quick poll, but I think I might come back. All right. Let's go back here. Apologies. Okay, so I was going to ask you, do you think that technology is interfering with children's sleep? But I think I've given you the answer there. That we know that technology is having a really profound impact not only on children's sleep but our adult sleep as well. There are some suggestions that children today are facing a chronic sleep deficit because of their use of digital devices. And this can have huge implications for their learning and their development and general well-being. When children sleep, their brain performs really a bit like a computer that defragments its hard drive. It formats and tidies things up. It performs 2 really important tasks. It prunes and it consolidates memories. And if children aren't getting sufficient sleep, then it can't perform these 2 tasks. And I'm sure we've all been at the end of the day with a very tired child. They can't learn, and it can also, in some instances, inhibit their growth hormones. So sleep is really, really important. But we know that the use of screens in the 90-minute period before children go to sleep can have a really adverse impact on their sleep. You see, when we're using devices, particularly tablets and smartphones that are backlit, these can hamper the body's production of melatonin. When we use these blue lit devices, devices that emit blue light, they suppress the body's production of melatonin. And melatonin is what our bodies need to produce to help us fall asleep quickly and easily. So without adequate melatonin levels, this can cause the onset of sleep to be delayed, and over time these sleep delays can accumulate into a sleep deficit. Now, it might only be 5 minutes one night, 10 minutes another, or 20 or even half an hour, but over time these sleep deficits accumulate into quite a significant sleep deficit, and this can have huge implications on a child's well-being, their social skills, their emotional well-being, and also their capacity to learn. We've had several studies look at children's academic performance, and sleep plays a really critical role in that. So what can we do? How much sleep, and this is really something that parents often find quite interesting. How much sleep does your child really need? And I've taken this data from a recent updated information from the National Sleep Foundation. And again, remembering averages, not all children fit into these particular quantities, but this gives you some indication about the sorts of volume of sleep that children really need. So it's really critical that children get adequate sleep. So what can we do in the digital world? Have a bedtime for digital devices. Now, before I mentioned that 90-minute cutoff period, that's in an ideal world. I'm a parent and I understand sometimes that's not feasible. Perhaps your child wants to read a book app at night, or perhaps they've been out all day and you've promised them some television time. So if the 90 minutes isn't possible, try to dim the brightness. If your child is going to use a tablet or a smartphone before bed, dim the brightness so it's not emitting as much blue light. Increase the distance between your child and the device. So this is sometimes where watching television is a better choice as opposed to using a tablet or a smartphone, because they don't sit as close and it doesn't emit as much blue light as well. So some people, Jocelyn Brewer, the psychologist, is calling this a digital sunset. So have a specific time when devices need to be switched off. This is also really important for nap time, so not just sleep at the end of the day, but also a nap time. Another strategy that I find works really well for families is to have a landing zone. Have a specific place in your house where all digital devices go at a set time to get charged. This makes it really easy for you to do a quick head count or a tech count and check that all the devices are there, and it stops those devices being smuggled into bedrooms. Another tip, and I remember I live by Maya Angelou's saying, when you know better, you do better. Many children have televisions and other devices, gaming consoles in their rooms. In an ideal world, bedrooms really should be media-free zones, tech-free zones. We know that the presence of devices in bedrooms can really interfere with children's sleep patterns. Not only can it delay the onset of sleep, as I described before, but devices in bedrooms can actually interfere with our sleep cycles, especially if alerts and notifications are still switched on. Children will often wake up and be distracted. Other times children will wake up naturally to go to the bathroom, and the presence of a device in the room is sometimes too tempting to be left switched off. What we know is that when we sleep, we generally go through 5 stages of sleep, and all of them are really critical. What happens is that if we get interrupted between one of these stages of sleep, when we resume our sleep cycle, when we resume our sleep after we've been woken up, we go back to the very beginning. We don't pick up where we left off. So if children are constantly being woken up because of alerts and notifications or checking digital devices, they're not actually getting sufficient amounts of sleep because they're not having the adequate quota of sleep cycles each night. So generally, have a landing zone, keep devices out of bedrooms, and have a digital sunset. This is also a wonderful book that I highly recommend. This is written by an Australian author, Danielle Wright, and Danielle provides meditations, affirmations, and a whole lot of breathing techniques that can gently provide an alternative to using screens in the night. So it's a wonderful resource that I often recommend. So my second tip for building healthy media habits in the digital world is to, and this is a bit of a controversial one, before I talk about it, it's really important to note that there's still some scientific uncertainty about this. So I don't want to cause unnecessary angst or panic, but we really need to be mindful of our children's exposure to Wi-Fi, to electromagnetic radiation. The World Health Organization in 2011 and the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, classified radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, which comes out of your router and your mobile phone, as a type 2B possible carcinogen. It's a possible cancer risk to humans. Now, my biggest concern is that Wi-Fi could potentially, and I stress that word potentially, could potentially be the tobacco or the asbestos of the 21st century. We don't yet know the long-term implications. And I have to be really honest, I used to think people that worried about Wi-Fi exposure were a bit crazy. However, I have dived into the research and have attended a couple of conferences, and can I tell you, I'm really concerned. My husband tells people I've become a Wi-Fi warrior and a Wi-Fi worrier. We don't yet know the long-term implications. There is a possible risk of harm. The World Health Organization's report says that because there's a possible risk of harm, that we should be adopting the precautionary approach. We have to take really pragmatic measures to reduce our exposure, in particular our children's exposure. Children's brains, their skull is a lot thinner than what ours is as adults, and they have a lot more water in them. So this means they're a lot more susceptible to possible environmental risks. So my friends call me Cautious Christy, and I hope I'm just being cautious, Christy, in this regard. But there are some simple things that we can do without having to completely unplug our internet and move to the country and disconnect. There are some precautionary things that we can do to minimise our exposure. So some of the tips that I often share with parents, and I will be hosting a digital health workshop in 2016 where we'll dive into this in a lot more detail, but some of the simple tips that I share with parents in my parent seminars is to turn routers off overnight or when they're not being used in classrooms. There is no need for children to be sitting underneath or adjacent to or in close proximity to a router around the clock. Hardwire where possible. Find that blue Ethernet cable that we all threw out when we got Wi-Fi and plug your laptop and your devices back in where possible. When you've got really poor signal on your smartphone, don't do the mobile phone dance and try and pick up a stronger signal. Send a text message. Send SMS instead of putting a phone up to your ear. In a lot of their phone manuals, it tells us that safe usage is actually using the device 48 centimetres away from your body. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't speak, unless I'm talking to someone really loud, but I certainly don't speak with the phone 48 centimetres away from my body. Really simple strategy. I call this the no apps in laps. Turn things like tablets and smartphones, encourage children to put them away from their body. Increase the distance between the physical body and digital devices. A funny little story, recently we were in a tile shop and he was then four-year-old son at the time came running out to the back of the tile shop announcing an emergency. My husband and I looked at each other thinking he smashed a tile or caused havoc with one of the displays. We walked out to the room only to discover that he had noticed a little girl sitting on the lounge with the iPad on her lap. As this Wi-Fi warrior, I've instilled in him that idea that no apps in laps. So really important that we keep devices away from physical bodies where we can. So I mentioned before plugging back in to minimise exposure. So it's just about reducing risk and reducing exposure. We don't yet know what the impact is, and I reiterate this again. I'm not saying that this is necessarily something we need to be hugely worried about, but there's enough scientific evidence to say we should at least be adopting this precautionary approach. Another strategy I mentioned before also is keeping devices out of laps and flicking devices to airplane mode. Unless your device needs to be using the internet, flicking it to airplane mode can work really well. So we've covered so far the use of screens around sleep and also Wi-Fi. The third healthy technology habit, and this is a really simple one but so important that we do it, is establishing tech-free zones. Children really need, and so do we, I think, as adults, spaces and places where technology just doesn't enter. Sacred screen-free zones. In the latest edition of the American Academy of Pediatrics Screen Time Guidelines, they actually recommend, these were released in October this year, and I've got a couple of blog posts up on my site about it if you want to read more information. One of the latest updates in their guidelines suggests that parents and schools should establish tech-free zones, places where technology won't interfere. When we're constantly tethered to devices, we never get the opportunity for what neuroscientists call mind-wandering mode. Mind-wandering mode is where we daydream. It's our default thinking mode. And this is what happens when we immerse ourselves in nature. This is why kids need green time as well as screen time. When children are in nature, they get to switch off. Remember, I talked at the very start of tonight's webinar, and if you were late on, you might be worth watching the replay. But the prefrontal cortex of our brain, the part of the brain where we're responsible for our higher order thinking skills and managing our impulses, when we're constantly being stimulated in a digital world, this part of the brain's working overtime. We've got to think about where we're directing our attention and what we're paying attention to and what things we're saving to our memory. When we go into nature and when we have time away from screens, we don't have to do that. We don't have the sensory bombardment, so the sensory and motor part of our brain isn't always processing information, and we can switch off our prefrontal cortex. Now, when we enter this mind-wandering state, this is where our subconscious can often take over. Who's ever, you'll know this exact state when I describe who has a shower and sometimes comes up with their best thinking or a solution to a problem that you've agonized over for weeks. Perhaps you've gone for a run, gone for a walk outside, or woken up from sleep. This is because your brain's had this mind-wandering state. It's a white space that our brains need, but our kids aren't getting this if they're constantly living in this busy, tethered, always switched on world. Here's this poor dad again. I hope this video works.
I thought you said no tablets at the table.
Yeah, just give me a minute here.
Could we please have a dialogue?
I gotta get this thing.
How was the birthday party?
Really good, and
You have to send me some pictures.
you're not even listening to me.
How was your week at school?
We did all kind of top.
Hello? Yeah, no, it's a good time.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you had video there. Mine wasn't playing properly, but I can send you the link if you want to actually watch that. Now, I've coined this term technoglect to describe a condition that a lot of psychologists and educators are really concerned about, and that is parents' use of technology. When we're constantly tethered to our devices and checking them, we're not forming the relationships with our children that they really need. And this can have huge implications on their social and emotional well-being. We need to make sure that we have some sacred places like the dinner table, like toy rooms and play spaces where devices just don't go. This is part of a really powerful campaign that's being published in South Korea, all about the power of technology and how it can really be detrimental if we don't use it properly. We know that, for example, there's some initial concerns from pediatric nutritionists that children's taste palette is changing because they're not actually tasting food when they're using tablets and other technologies around mealtime. So as a family, it's really, really important that you establish some places and spaces in your house where technology just won't go.
Okay guys, time
This
for dinner.
device might help you do that.
Come help set the table.
Now you all want one of these, don't you? I think they'd make a fortune if they really sold these. So, simple rule that works well in our family and that I know works well with other families, and my 5-year-old is really good at pulling my husband or myself up at this one. No tablets, no technology at the table. Where possible, keep meal zones tech-free. Now, remember I said at the beginning, I'm not always perfect. We do enjoy an occasional TV dinner, especially on a Friday or Saturday night, so it's not about never doing these things, but we have to be mindful about the sorts of technology habits we're developing from a very young age, if it's what we always do. Really important for parents, this is a really powerful reminder, and again, I'm not professing to be perfect at this, but we have to be mindful about switching off our devices or not being tethered to them. Pediatric, in my book research that I was doing earlier this year, I was quite surprised when I interviewed some pediatricians in emergency departments because they started to report increasing rates of children presenting with playground injuries. Now, 2 of their theories, and again not substantiated by research yet, but some of the anecdotal evidence suggests that children are having these injuries One is because they're not being supervised, that parents are being distracted by their digital devices at the park and not providing adequate supervision. And the other theory is obviously the technology displacement effect. Kids just aren't spending the same amount of time exploring and playing outside because they're spending more time with screens. So I guess this closely relates to the fourth strategy that I wanted to talk about today, and that is using technology intentionally. Having really clear parameters about how, when, and what technology young children can use. I have a media management plan, and this is just a Word document, and it's free for you to download. I can send you a link after this and pop it on my Facebook page as well. But this is just a simple Word document that as a family you come up with a proactive plan about exactly what, where and when. It's so easy for what I call the technology creep to happen. Your child comes in and we know how fantastic kids are at Pester Power. Please, can I use the iPad or just a little bit of TV? And before we know it, the hours can creep into even more hours. So we have to really have firm parameters. I think it's one thing to establish boundaries and rules about technology. The really tricky part is actually enforcing them. What we have to be very, very careful of is that we're not using technology as the digital pacifier. Psychologists are particularly concerned that today's young children's self-regulation skills aren't being fully developed, because we're often using screens as digital pacifiers. So children aren't getting the opportunity to calm themselves down if we're constantly placating them with a screen or a device. So what do we have to do? We've got to manage our use of technology. We don't want technology managing us. And for many adults, this is not the case. Technology literally manages us. We're a slave to our devices. We have to use technology in really intentional ways. It has to be purposeful, particularly with young children. So, for example, a strategy that works really well is pre-recording television shows that you're happy for your child to watch. That way you can skip the ads. We know, for example, today's children will watch over 40,000 ads if they watch commercial television each year. It also means on tablet devices having a folder full of apps that you're happy for your child to use and to play with. So really important that we have these parameters around our technology use. And the last point that I wanted to talk about tonight in terms of healthy media habits was eye posture. There are some really, and again, very early research, and this is something I've covered in my book and something that I'll talk much more about in an upcoming workshop on digital health. But we've got evidence. We know, for example, that our technology use is having huge implications on our musculoskeletal health and young children's musculoskeletal development. There's emerging research that shows us, for example, that when adults are using smartphones and walking at the same time, that we actually modify our gait in order to compensate for our increased distraction. So our use of devices is literally changing the way in which we walk. So this raises huge concerns for young children's physical development. If we know that adults' more developed brains and bodies are being changed because of the use of technology, so too are our children's. So chiropractors, we know, are seeing increasing rates of children present with serious neck and back pain because of prolonged and incorrect posture when using devices. We're hunching over our devices, such as iPads and handheld games. A study from the UK found that 73% of children aged between 11 and 16 were spending between 1 and 6 hours every day looking at a laptop, a tablet and a computer. And that they're presenting with increasing injury rates. If children don't form correct postures early on in life, then this can have huge implications on their musculoskeletal development. And I apologise, that's my baby crying, but my husband's up there consoling him. So what do we need? What is correct posture? So really simple things with ergonomics. With mobile devices, I should have gone back, like tablets and smartphones, actually encouraging children to use them on their tummies. This not only keeps the neck in a neutral position, but it also, they often lie on their elbows, and children are very, very reluctant to lay on their elbows for long periods of time. If they are going to lie on their tummies, often popping a little pillow under their stomach so that then their back is in a a flat position can work really well. If you can't get them lying down on their tummies, the good old-fashioned beanbag can work really well, and in using the beanbag they can bring the device up to their eye level. With any technology, tablet or laptop, we really want children bringing the technology to their eye level, not their eyes hunching or stooping to see the device. In terms of laptops, ergonomics, we really want their knees and spines to be at a 90-degree angle, and we want to adjust their workstation so that it's at a level that's easy for them, as opposed to it being, their body's adjusting to suit the device's level. So we really need them to sit up and to readjust their posture. A simple strategy that I promote for healthy posture, and is also really good for children's eye health, is the 20-20-20 rule. And that is that after your child has used technology for 20 minutes, encourage them to do something for 20 seconds and look at something at least 20 feet away. This helps their eyes recalibrate. And then do something physically active, I think I said that one, and then come back to the screen. So that's the 20-20-20-20 rule. With a laptop, we really want their knees bent, their shoulders to be relaxed, and their lower back to be supported too. But again, so long as they're not doing this excessively or for too long a period of time, and that they're moving in between, this is unlikely to be harmful. The other thing that's often overlooked with musculoskeletal health is children carrying heavy tablet devices and laptops in their school bags these days. We need to be really mindful that their school bag shouldn't be more than 10% of their body weight. So we just need to be mindful that we're not overweighting them. So there we have the my five tips for tonight about what you can do to form healthy technology habits. And they were minimising screens before sleep, minimising Wi-Fi exposure, establishing those tech-free zones in your house and school, using technology intentionally and with a purpose, and fostering healthy posture in the digital age. It really comes down to this balanced approach.
This is Dot. This is Dot. She knows a lot. She knows how to tap, how to swipe, and how to share. But there's more to life beyond the screen. We all need time to reboot, recharge, and restart. So then we can tap, we can swipe, and we can share.
And that is a book that you can purchase. So my key messages are we need to teach our kids in this digital age just how important it still is to switch off. We need to have bedtimes for our devices. We need to have screen sabbaticals like screen-free Sundays, and we need to have intentional pauses. Really, really important in this digital age that children still get opportunities to play and explore in nature. Remember, it's not only good for their mind-wandering mode, but it's also good for their physical development. So really, really important that it's a balanced approach. There are my details. If this is the first time that I've met you, it's great that you've come along and listened tonight. I appreciate people giving up their time to come and listen. I speak, as I mentioned before, to parents, educators, and to health professionals throughout the country, all about healthy and helpful ways to use technology, whilst at the same time minimising some of the potential harmful effects. So I hope that you found that helpful. I'm now, hopefully, going to go back in, oops. Hoping that I haven't done that to you all. I'm hoping that you can at least see me. Oops. Let's see if that works. There we go. So what I might do now is see if anybody, is that one, has any questions. Just trying to see. Not sure. Wait with me 1 second. I'm just trying to find where I can see the questions. Okay, sorry. Bear with me, I apologise. And if I don't get around to answering all these, I will do my best to get back to you after tonight with some questions. First tab. Oh, no, I don't want that one. Sorry, literally doing this as we speak. Oops, no, I didn't want that. Here we go. Sorry, I'm here. So let me see if we have some questions, and I'm going to go through these in no particular order. Thank you to those of you. Questions regarding digital homework. From a school's perspective, I think definitely being very mindful just about how much screen time children are probably naturally having at home without imposing extra demands from a school's perspective. I think parents, I know a lot of parents are really grappling with this because they're concerned that their children are spending a lot of time at screens at school and then coming home and wanting in their leisure time to be using screens, and then on top of that having homework requirements that also require screens. So I think as a school we definitely need to be mindful and as a community, I guess, coming up with a decision that works best. But there are some updated, the American Academy of Pediatrics in earlier this month changed their screen time recommendations. So we no longer have a quantitative measure. They used to have prescriptive amounts of healthy screen time. These have gone, and instead the American Academy of Pediatrics have updated their guidelines. So I can pop in a link afterwards on my blog post. It's one of the recent blog posts. But you definitely, I think, need to be mindful about screen time, and particularly as it relates to the increasing demands, particularly in schoolwork. Be very mindful. I think we get caught up in screen time as just a quantity, a universal measure, and obviously there's a difference between a child spending 2 hours watching mindless YouTube videos as opposed to 2 hours creating content for a school project or doing research. So I think this is where we get into dangerous territory when we actually prescribe safe amounts of screen time. Another question here, games that are addictive like Minecraft. I'm keen to learn what is beneficial and what we should avoid. Really good question. I've got a whole series of blog posts about Minecraft and how parents can go about managing Minecraft. I'm very, very reluctant to use the word addicted with young children and technology, particularly with children up to about age of 8. I think children can definitely form very strong attachments to technology, but I'm very reluctant to use the word addicted. For a particular child to be addicted to a technology, there are a whole lot of criteria that need to be met. What we know is that children form a very strong dependence on technology, and I'm not sure, I think it was a question from Nick about this, whether you saw the beginning where I started to talk about dopamine and how when children are using screens, they're often getting lots of that dopamine. But what we know is that children don't learn to self-regulate their behaviour until at least 6 to 8 years of age. So it's really difficult to say children are addicted if they can't actually self-regulate their behaviour to then make a choice to use the technology. With addiction, we normally know that a person suffering from addiction will know the consequences, know that using too much technology will have adverse consequences, but they still choose to go ahead with that behaviour, fully aware of what the dire consequences can be. I just don't think young children have that capacity. So Minecraft is one of those games that children really love, and basically it's the game that never ends. There's no finite period, there's no definitive finishing point, and so it's really hard for children literally to switch off from that. But please feel free to check out my blog post. There's about 3 or possibly 4 posts all about Minecraft there. Okay. There's been a question here from Michelle. Are children going to be behind at school if they don't get up to speed on iPads, or do they just pick them up? If I start him on the iPad, am I going to have a major addiction issue later on? This is a really good question, and I've again got some blog posts about this, but there's absolutely no rush to dunk young children into the digital stream. In fact, the research tells us at this point in time that children really don't learn from screens until somewhere between 24 to 36 months of age. Neurologically, their brains aren't wired to process two-dimensional screens. So if they are learning from an iPad, it generally takes them, it's something called the video transfer deficit, and it usually takes them about 2.5 times as long to learn from a screen as what it would from a real life person and real life interaction. So there's absolutely no evidence that tells us that introducing screens early on will accelerate your child's development, and likewise there's nothing to indicate that you'll be hampering your child's development. In particular with young children, we have to be mindful of what we call the displacement effect. So when children are using a screen, when they're using technology, they're not doing something else. So there's this real opportunity cost. And for young children, particularly under the age of 2, we have to be really mindful about what they're missing out on. Remember in the beginning I talked about their unchanging developmental needs. That they definitely have these developmental needs, and that we have to be mindful that technology is not encroaching on those. TV on, now background TV, I will say this about, parents are often unaware of this, a bit of background TV on is during mealtime sometimes occurs, and that's fine so long as it's not interrupting the conversation all the time. Just be very mindful with background TV. We know 2 really important things from the research. Background TV looks quite benign, it doesn't look very harmful, but we know that background TV can have really adverse impacts on children's language development and their play. They may not appear to be watching the screen, in fact they're probably playing and appear quite disinterested in the screen, but we know from a whole lot of research very conclusively that it does interrupt their play, and it can interrupt with their language development as well. So where possible, flicking the television off when it's not being used. I'm going to flick back through some questions. Yeah, turning off the Wi-Fi router, using a real alarm clock. I know they're really hard to find. We were looking the other day for a real alarm clock. Yes, everything is going digital. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Look, I look forward to, I'm just trying to double check and see if I've missed anything. Let me put some more information together on the digital homework. Can you sit an iPod on something whilst on their lap? Look, there are some products that claim to reduce electromagnetic radiation absorption. At the conferences that I've been to, the leading experts are saying that these aren't sufficient, that they do, whilst they do reduce electromagnetic radiation exposure, they're not necessarily guaranteeing to be at a safe level. So it's just about reducing exposure generally. Recommending dealing with screen time in daycare centres. Oh, that's a tricky one. Really important yeah, this is a tricky one, and again it needs to be obviously a community consultation, but I think having conversations about what your child's doing with the screen, is it educational or is it being used as the digital babysitter? I think definitely inquiring, sorry I'm answering Linda's question here, about dealing with screen times in daycare centres. checking what policies they have around it, how frequently it's used, and most importantly, what your child's doing with the technology in a screen in a preschool. I have to admit, I do work with some preschools that are looking at using technology in really healthy ways, and it's being used in developmentally appropriate ways and in ways that actually enhance and support children's learning. It's intentional and it's grounded in what we know that children need for optimal learning. So just check that out with your preschool. Children's eye health, yes, how do I find out? So Jen's asked me and how to mediate the effect. So what we're seeing, Jen, thanks for your question, is that the ophthalmologists are seeing increasing rates of myopia, which is nearsightedness in young children. And at this stage, again, we don't have long-term or empirical evidence to support this, but at this stage the research is suggesting that it's because of children's screen use. So again, what we need to do, a couple of strategies that I recommend for optimal eye health are to encourage your child to blink a lot more. Whenever we use a screen as an adult or a child, we blink about 30% less. So encourage your child to blink a lot more while they're using a screen. That 20-20-20 rule, 20-20-20-20 rule that I mentioned before also works really well. So encouraging your child every 20 minutes to take at least a 20-second break, look at something 20 feet away, and to blink at least 20 times as well. That will lubricate the eyes and stop them from getting sore. And also taking time out in nature. It's really important. When children are in nature and they're playing, their eyes develop the depth of vision that they would naturally need as well. I do have, Jen, as well, a blog post on that on my site. I published something recently about minimising their harmful effects on their eyesight, so make sure you check that out as well. I'm just doing a quick swoop through. Apologies if I didn't get to everybody's question. I think that's about it. I think I've timed it so that my baby's asleep, so I can jump off the call and not have to pat someone off. Thank you to those of you who have turned up live. I really appreciate it. And to those of you listening to the replay, I look forward to being able to do more of these in the future, because I know as parents it's often hard to hear someone come and talk live. And I will look for some other ways that I can support you. I hope that that was helpful and has allayed some of your fears, because as I mentioned at the start, whether we love it or we loathe it, technology is here to stay, so we've got to just look for those healthy and helpful ways. I've got some really exciting things planned for 2016, and I will certainly be looking forward to doing some more of these webinars. Thank you to those of you who have given up your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Until I see you again, thank you.